Excellent. So we are recording this webinar. So if you don't want to appear on a recording later, just turn your camera off. Yeah, let us know if you have any other issues. But I'll already get started. Like I said, welcome. This is a webinar by the Renewables Grid Initiative under our series of energy and nature webinars. This is the second one called, and I believe a very catchy title, Shared Airspace, Innovative Approaches for a Bird-Friendly Electricity Grid. Just a bit about this webinar series. The point of what we're doing here is to spread best practices from across Europe and beyond across 3 branches. One of them is bird protection, another one is vegetation management and support biodiversity, and another one is multifunctionality of infrastructure. And you'll see us running webinars like this again and again, every 1 month or 2 months throughout the year. This is part of our activities funded by the European Commission's LIFE program, who funds our onshore nature work and for which I'm responsible. And yeah, so a grateful nod in that direction, I would say, to start with. Just to introduce myself before we get started, I'll be moderating today. My name is Innis. I work for the Renewables Grid Initiative. I'm a manager for energy ecosystems, and I'll tell you more about my activities later on. But yeah, the real topic about today is a very important topic. It's about how to protect birds around energy infrastructure, around power lines in specific. We want to open up the topic and explain what the problem is, what the issue is that we're facing, and also, of course, look at solutions that are already being implemented. We believe that collaboration, that data, that exchange, that citizen science approaches are extremely important. And it's part of my work at the RGI to look for what we see as the best practices. And 2 of them we have with us here today. So as you see the logos at the bottom, we have Neuling from NABU and Dominique Verbelen from Natuurpunt. You'll hear from both of them, and then you'll hear from myself at the end. That so much as a teaser. Let me just go over some quick housekeeping. Like I said, we are recording. Please take a moment to rename yourselves. So following these very well modeled instructions at the bottom there, you can rename yourself with your organization's name so that we know who we're talking to. That would be very nice. Please do mute yourself when you're not speaking. Use video, especially for the discussion part at the end. I think it's really nice when we can see people's faces when we're talking. We want to have half an hour discussion at the end. We're very welcome questions, so please do write your questions in the chat throughout the webinar, and raise your hand if you want to speak. Please keep it short because we're on a time limit. But yeah, we'd really like to hear from you all, especially at the end of the discussion. We'll have a brief pause between inputs for clarification questions, but like I said, the real discussion gets going at the end. So just briefly, who is RGI? Probably you're aware of who we are and what we do, but just in case you aren't, let me present us. We are an NGO based in Berlin in Germany, and we define ourselves as a unique collaboration of NGOs and TSOs from across Europe, engaging in what we define as an energy transition ecosystem of actors. And together with our partners from civil society and grid transmission, TSOs means transmission system operators, we promote fair, transparent, sustainable grid development to enable the growth of renewables to achieve decarbonization in line with the Paris Agreement. So what does all that mean? We bring these maybe unlikely partners together to the same table to agree on positions, to work on projects together, to really push forward the energy transition in a way which works for people and nature with maximum consideration of all of the different sensitivities. And activities like this, like I said, really feed into building awareness about the role of the grid and how we can make it as sustainable, transparent, fair, and inclusive as possible. It makes sense that as we work on the environment and the grid, that we also look at really all of the interactions between energy and nature. And for sure, one of the main things that we look at and have done historically is how to protect birds around the grid. This is fed into many activities that we've done over the year, which includes, for example, a scientific study done with the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, and the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in the UK, looking into data use by TSOs and trying to look at how can we share more data. As I said, data is really at the base of a lot of decision makings and mitigation strategies. But not just that, we also create some nice communication materials. We have a video, which I will share in the link, share in the chat later, where we present the problem in a very digestible way to the public. We also have a database on our website, which is brimming full of good practices with bird protection from our members and beyond. So there you can find inspiration for some of the very good work that's being done. And in the frame of our best practice spreading that we do at RGI, we also have a Good Practice of the Year award. This is run across 3 categories, and environmental protection is one of them. And it's not uncommon for a bird protection practice to become the winner. This was the case in 2020 when the Royal Society for the Conservation of Nature in Jordan won with their work to protect mainstreaming soaring bird conservation in the energy sector. They focused at the start on wind turbines, but this has since started to look at power lines as well. Okay, that's nearly all from me. But just to briefly bring you through the agenda, we have started with this introduction. Here we are. And then we're going to pass over to Erik from NABU. Then it will be Dominique from Natuurpunt. And then you hear from me again. And all going to plan, we'll have 25-30 minutes at the end for an open discussion. So we are ready to kick off. I would ask my colleague Esten to spotlight Erik so everyone can see his wonderful face. And I will get your slides ready, Erik. I have them here prepared. And yeah, everyone, welcome to the stage, Erik Neuling.
Yeah, thanks, Liam, for introducing me. Thanks, everyone, for joining this webinar and for showing interest in this very important topic that we as NABU, as a Nature Conservation Union and BirdLife partner in Germany, follow up on since a few decades actually by now, in different intensities and on different aspects, looking nationally, Europe-wide and globally. And I'm glad that I'm able to present you some new information, or maybe also some overall relevant information on the topics of electrocution and collision, which are the both aspects that we will focus on when we look at power line dangers for birds. And the focus here is the EU situation, so how the member states in the EU deal with these topics. But I will use my presentation in the beginning to inform you or to pick you up on the impacts of power lines on birds in general, and also the bird risks that we really look at in Germany and Europe. So which birds are affected, etc. And then the main part is our study that we contracted for getting more information on the situation in the EU. We will look at the outcome of this study on electrocution issues, on the collision. We have a look on the legal situation in the member states, and I will end with the recommendations that we published in this study at the end. So which impacts of power lines do we actually have to look at? One is that power lines lead to the loss of breeding and resting sites through avoidance of vertical structures by many birds, especially ground breeding birds. So the displacement of breeding habitats, breeding grounds is one issue. Also, one part is predation. The pylons actually are good perching sites for predators like crows, but also for ground predators that actually patrol these power lines, because there are, especially in open landscapes, very diverse structures beneath the pylons or in between those roots. So they find more prey here than in like an open agrariable field. We also have the issue of habitat loss and modification, especially in forests when we have corridors that dissect wooded areas and wooded habitats, because the vegetation changes and the microclimate in these forested areas, and this affects, of course, biodiversity. But we will look especially on the issue of electrocution. That means that we have unsecure poles and components on these poles on the medium voltage level. Those components lead to short circuits and ground faults, mainly for bird species of the groups of raptors, storks, owls, and crows. And then we focus on the issue of collision, which is a very different aspect of power line danger. Many large birds, especially waterfowl, cranes, bustards, and waders, they collide with the power lines in the flight, so they just don't see the power lines early enough to navigate above or beneath or around them. And especially the less visible ground wires on top of the pylons are the biggest danger. Next slide. For Germany, we had an estimation contracted in 2017 where we wanted to find out how many collision victims are there actually. We only looked on the high and extra high voltage level, which is approximately 64,000 kilometers running through Germany. And we found out that altogether there is 1.5 to 2.8 million collision victims as a relevant or reliable estimation, which is quite much. The medium voltage grid is at least from the same length, but electrocution figures are unknown. But it's less of a problem in Germany by now because we have a federal law that forbids new bird dangerous power lines. But still also medium voltage level power lines are a problem for collision. Next slide. Which birds do we actually look at when we have the European map and the German perspective? In Germany, the white stork and the eagle owl were two bird species that were affected by electrocution in the 80s and 90s so much that it was necessary to find a legal solution to save those species from electrocution and to prohibit the erection of new dangerous power poles on the medium voltage level. But also collision is an issue also in different countries. So we have gulls, we have the whooping swarm, pelicans, the woodcock, and also especially in the eastern parts of Europe, we have with the steppe eagle, the sarcophagan, imperial eagle, some species are affected by electrocution so much that the population is actually affected. So there's a lot of need to address this issue. For us, it's also important to look at the migration. The three large bird species on the right side are crucial for us when we look at the dangers they face in general, and electrocution and also collision for the stork species are relevant in all the Balkan countries, Turkey, the Middle East and East African territory of their migration distribution, but also in the Western migration route, there are still a lot of problems with power lines. Next slide. So what's our goal as NABU? When we look at this issue, we want to eliminate or reduce bird electrocution and collisions on power lines in the EU. We also want in the BirdLife network recommendations for the Commission. We want guidelines for implementing the goals from the Convention on Migratory Species and the Berne Convention. And at the end, it's necessary in our sense that we have a blueprint for non-EU countries along the migration routes. So what did we do with the study that we contracted? It's actually published just a few weeks ago. We are happy that we have it. We contracted a bird conservation organization in Slovakia, RPS, Raptor Protection Slovakia. And the study mainly bases on surveys done with NGOs in Europe. And those surveys looked at the status quo in all member states and on national solutions. We look at the grid structure and the responsibilities for the grid in the national or on the national level, the problem description and the affected species for either electrocution or collision is focused. Then we look at technical approaches and efficient and also non-efficient solutions. We had national legal obligations and forms of cooperation included in the study, and also, of course, conclusions and recommendations to the EU. When we look at the topic of electrocution, what did we find out? The whole problem of data is one big issue, because we still have a very heterogeneous situation of what we actually know on the effects of electrocution in different countries, but also on the how important this is regarding or in comparison to other dangers for birds. But we do have research projects on electrocution in quite a few member states in the past years and decades. And we do have also a lot of progress against electrocution, especially in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, Spain, Germany, also Slovakia itself. And in the Netherlands, for example, we have a really high amount of power infrastructure underground on the medium level. So this is, of course, then a country where we don't really have much impact of electrocution on birds. But still, there is a lot of data missing or insufficient for our surveys for the study from a few northeastern and Mediterranean EU countries. When we look at the legal side addressing electrocution, we see that a high percentage of medium voltage power lines are already underground, not only in the Netherlands, also in Austria, also in Germany, Luxembourg, and Sweden. We do see that most companies in the countries retrofit power lines after significant incidents, and then in many cases very fast. So this is good. The issue is dealt with in quite a detail with more attention in the past, so in the past 10 years and earlier actually, but still in several countries kilopoles, not still, but they started actually to disappear or to be retrofitted on a large scale after legislative action. So there needed to be legal guidelines to actually bring the solution to the power lines. And the construction of new kilopoles became generally prohibited. This is also something we saw in quite a few countries. Still, many countries in Europe are there with unequipped low and medium voltage power lines by effective mitigating measures. The technical outcome looking at electrocution issues is that electrocution is significantly higher on construction types with 1-pin insulators per phase conductor. This is something that you see on those two pictures. So there's insulation is upright on top of the pylon. We see that plastic insulators are more effective than purge exclusion devices or purge discouragers, which are used in some countries. The products that are used should be made from durable, long-lasting materials. If they're damaged or incorrectly installed, they are useless and actually sometimes more dangerous than non-insulated poles. The construction for cross arms, insulators, and other components should leave no space for birds to perch close to the energized wires, or the shape of the console discourages birds from sitting down. But here we have different approaches on national level. In Germany, for example, we say we just have to look at the far or the big enough distances between those dangerous components to not danger the birds. This is more the strategy we have in Germany. All dangerous constructions of crossarms should be replaced with a crossarm of a 45% angle, as you see in the picture above. This is something they do in Slovakia, and this seems to be very, very effective. And if there's a perch attached below, as you see in the picture, this is actually also helpful. Switches should be attached below the crossarms with insulated jumper wires and upright insulators substituted with suspended insulators. So if you have insulation on those components, if you use switches, that is also very helpful. So I think we take questions later on. I will just here go through the slides all at once. If we look at the collision issue, we also had a lot of feedback on collision. There are a lot of research projects and on diverters in quite a few countries. The progress of collision mitigation is generally not as far as with electrocutions. That is something that we found out. Bird diverters have been often installed on several power line sections in a few Western and Eastern EU countries, but often their efficiency was not evaluated. So for the whole topic of diverters, I will come back later. What we also found out is that there's still a lot of data missing or insufficient from some Northern and Southeastern European countries that were asked to give us information on this survey. The legal outcome on collisions is that we have much fewer bird individuals, but more bird species affected that are killed by a collision in comparison to electrocution. The collision topic lacked a systematic approach in the past, but gets more attention now. In reality, this problem is actually large enough to represent one of the main factors of unnatural mortality for birds. Only some parts of potentially dangerous grid sections are responsible for the majority of killed birds, looking on collision issues. So these sections need to be identified and treated with proper mitigation measures. In the end, that shows that early consideration in planning processes is therefore crucial, especially because of this reason that we have like really hotspots based on topography, affected bird species distribution, migration. So this is something that we can actually look at in the planning and approval processes. Next slide. A technical outcome on collision is that first, for constructions of high and highest voltage levels, the biggest risk is associated with the highest thin ground wires on top. In areas with a special risk of bird collision, new overhead power lines should not be installed. Therefore, and existing ones should be replaced if possible, by burying them, or at least modified by installing visual marks or lighting systems. You see here two of the diverter types that are on the market. Both are used in Germany. Some of them are by now also possible to install by drones. Those diverters, they should be durable and effective. This is also something we got from the survey. The best solution is to use anti-collision luminous devices that are actually able to reflect sunlight during the daytime and emit the luminescent light at twilight or at nighttime. Also, clearly visible, large and high contrasting bird diverters as the one on the top that also move and reflect should be used in energized conductors or ground wires, or in both if necessary. If we now look at this legal frame that we have in the EU, looking on bird protection and power lines, we have this graphic. It shows in 5 different questions how the different countries are distributed. We see that there are legal obligations in at least 40% of the member states. We see that national regulation and company guidelines exist also in at least half of the EU countries. We see that in very most countries, there's a good cooperation with grid operators. This is the third question. We see that the costs of bird protection are mostly covered by the companies themselves and partly refunded by, in at least 50% of the member states, for example, by live programs from the EU. We see also this graph, we see that there's no answers on the legal situation in Slovenia, Malta, Ireland, the Netherlands, but this is because they have a high amount of low and medium voltage infrastructure underground. So the issue is just not as relevant as in other countries. The highest recognition we see in Germany, Hungary, Sweden, Spain, and Slovakia regarding the feedback we got on the survey done by RPS. We also looked on which organizations are involved in the topic. We have BirdLife partners looking at these issues in 15 countries. There are also other NGOs in Cyprus and Slovakia that deal with the topic, but we also have countries where there is no NGO coverage. And also there are some countries we didn't get information from. What we also see is that environmental impact assessment procedures are in place in most countries. We see, or we got the feedback that the good relationship or cooperation that are built with the electric companies and the grid distributors are far more effective, useful, and important than the obligations set by law in many countries. So this is something we can actually pick up on if we look at collaborations as RGI is coordinating. The costs, we also had this on the slide before, the costs for protection of birds from power lines are covered mostly by the European Union under the LIFE projects, if not by the companies themselves, and also sometimes from the relevant ministries in the national countries, eventually with the support of other donations. I will come to the end and will conclude with the recommendations published in the study towards the EU. The underground cabling is the best solution for birds. Long-term effectiveness does not decrease with its use, different to overhead power lines. The competent administrations in this matter of conservation of wild species must really assume their responsibility in the solution of this problem. This is something that we recommend also for this overview towards the EU. TSOs and DSOs should be obliged to produce guidelines for technical solutions to mitigate bird strikes or electrocution on national level and an implementation plan for mitigation measures. Environmental managers should be obliged to identify the most problematic points of mortality and demand their modification and be actively involved in solving the problem. The systematic data monitoring should be increased and supported, which would enable to persuade public opinion and electrical power companies for the need of mitigation measures in countries that have not relevant data. Bird conservation of power lines should also be the top priority, especially in areas of important EU migration corridors, accompanied by really important resting and roosting sites on those migratory routes. More knowledge about the factors increasing collision and electrocution mortality rates is necessary. This is also an outcome of the study. National or international sensitivity mapping for location or for locating the most critical areas for bird and power line interaction should be prepared to focus time and money to those sections. Bird protection should be taken into account early in the planning stage with expert field surveys, including at least 1 year of ornithological investigations. Actually, more is more useful. To characterize local and regional avifauna, bird movements, key sites for breeding, feeding, and resting, and also the movements, especially at dawn and at dusk. Those to be monitored is really interesting and very necessary. That also leads to the recommendation for a before-after control impact assessment, supported by monitoring. An international database is also useful to collect information about bird collisions and electrocutions. It should be designed to help with preventing future bird power line incidents, and this goes along with standardized protocols to improve the reliability and potential utility in meta-analysis done in whatever framework. This is what we found out. I'm grateful for your interest, and I'm happy to answer the questions you have. I don't know when Liam will tell us.
Thank you very much, Erik, for that excellent presentation of what is really a wonderful study. It's by far the most comprehensive study that I've seen, and I think it's already so important to have such an overview. But as the energy transition accelerates, as the necessary infrastructure is built out, it's going to become more and more important to have all of this information in one place. So congratulations again on a really, really well done study. From the theory and from the study, we now go to a very practical example, which I explained is part of our work at RGI to find the best practices on the ground. And this work done by Natuurpunt and Natagora in Belgium, together with Elia, the TSO, is really at the forefront. But don't let me give you any spoilers. I'll pass the word straight to our colleague, Dominique Verbelen. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you, Dominique.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Dominique Verbelen. I work for Natuurpunt, which is the biggest NGO as far as nature conservation is concerned in Belgium. And today I'm going to take you through the how we came to a risk analysis of high voltage power lines in Belgium in order to map bird collision prone spans. So birders and non-birders alike quite often do find casualties underneath high voltage power lines, but only rarely are these casualties mentioned to the transmission system operators. Now, this is exactly what happened in 2013-2014, when a lady in Oudenaarde found 65 dead gulls in a relatively short amount of time. Now, the lady was quite shocked by that, and she decided to contact Elia, which is the sole transmission system operator in Belgium. So Elia is responsible for all high voltage power lines in Belgium. And she wanted the TSO to undertake some actions. Now, there were some telephone calls between Natuurpunt and Elia, and we didn't have a lot of experience with bird diverters neither, but we advised them to install bird curls. And so Elia did. And as a consequence, we saw that the number of casualties dropped from 65 to only 3 in a comparative amount of time. So that was actually the very beginning of our collaboration with Elia. Now, Elia being a TSO, its main core business is, of course, to guarantee the supply of electricity. And it didn't have the proper knowledge how to avoid bird casualties. And that's because of the Oudenaarde case. That's why they asked us, look, will you be able as a green NGO, as a bird conservation organization, would you be able to identify the most risky lines in Belgium? And we contacted our colleagues of Natagora, which is the sister organization of Natuurpunt in the southern part of Belgium, and Bird Protection Vlaanderen, Vogelbescherming Vlaanderen. And the three of us sat together in order to see which bird data we had at hand. And in Belgium, luckily enough, we do have quite some long-term monitoring data sets. And one of the most important ones, most probably, is the data set dealing with the wintering water birds. In the winter half year, from October up till March, all the most important water bird sites in the whole of the country are counted on a standardized way. And this project dates back up till 1969. So it gives us a very, very valuable set of the most important water bird wintering sites. This data set gave us this map showing the various wintering sites, the fairly important ones, and the very important ones, all being defined on a specific set of criteria. We also have other data sets specifically dealing with the roosts of sensitive species. Some birds do have a tendency to roost together in very, very, very large flocks. Especially gulls are well known to do so. And these birds which use communal roosts are specifically active at dusk and dawn when they are commuting between their feeding grounds and their the place where they sleep. And commuting at dusk and dawn, of course, means that you fly in in conditions with very poor light, which makes them all the more vulnerable to bird collisions. Now, this gave us another map, once again showing the very important, and the fairly important roosting size of the various species considered. We had another very important layer, being the layer of the breeding colonies. In this layer, we mainly focused on those species with a high sensitivity to collisions. You here see some pictures: the gray heron, black-headed gull, common tern, sandwich tern, great cormorant. These common bird species which are using breeding colonies, we do have very, very accurate data. And this gave us yet another map of the breeding colonies. Once again, you can here see some clusters like the harbor of Zeebrugge, which is hosting large breeding colonies of gulls and terns. We also have the Nature 2000 reserve of Hutswin, also well known for large breeding colonies of gulls and terns. You see a cluster in the Iser Valley, which is well known for its breeding colonies of gray heron and Eurasian spoonbill. And maybe most importantly, you have the harbor area in Antwerp, where you have internationally important breeding colonies of Eurasian spoonbill and especially Mediterranean gulls. So little by little, we added layer by layer. You can see that we added some other layers, like a layer on the rare breeding birds. We had a layer on the plover staging areas. A very important layer was the layer on the geese foraging areas. And what we actually did, we took two very important things into consideration. First, the bird layer considered, and secondly, the distance of a specific high voltage power line going through a specific area. I'll give you one example. For instance, if you were considering an important waterbird site and the high voltage power line was going straight through that important waterbird site, we gave it a score of 30 if it was a very important site. If, however, that high voltage power line was not going straight through, but passing at a distance of less than 1 kilometer, we gave it a score of 14. If, once again, it turned out to be a very important waterbird site. Now, these scores of 30, 14, 9, and 4 are, of course, a bit random. It's a best professional judgment, but they show to turn out to have a very accurate result. So when we combined all these layers, we came to the collision landscape. And this is the map shown here. Once again, you see some clusters like the polar area, which came out to be a very important one because of the internationally important numbers of overwintering white-fronted geese, pink-footed geese, and grey-leg geese. You also have, once again, the Iser Valley, which is hosting a large number of waterfowl, but is an extremely important staging area of black-tailed godwits during their spring migration. Once again, the harbor of Antwerp, which became very important because of the many nature restoration works which were carried out there. And then you see many major river valleys, which also turned out to be quite important. What you see here is that risk, the previous map, we made an overlay with the existing grids of Elia, and this shows the overall risk scores by power line segments. So in total, the total grid of Elia holds 5,614 kilometers, which is quite a lot, but actually only a very small percentage of 5.8%, being 325 kilometers, turned out to be highly dangerous. Like Erik said, it's very important to focus on those black lines, on those most dangerous lines. So these were the black lines, which made it kind of easy, or easier at least, for Elia to prioritize on the polder area, the harbor area of Antwerp, and the harbor area of Ghent, along with some major river valleys. These were the most risky areas of the total grid. So Elia then started to put up bird diverters on the most risky lines, on the really black lines. They did put up avispheres. They also did put up bird curls of various sizes and of various colors. But he also wanted to have a very friendly, user-friendly database in order to gather data more efficiently. So we had in Flanders waarnemingen.be, which is the Flemish version of observation.org, in which we had already a field on behavior, which is gedrag in Dutch. And in that field of behavior, we did add one specific option, which is casualties caused by high voltage power lines. And through our newsletters, through our volunteers, through our many working groups, we made our volunteers aware of that new option within observation.org. And we got, between the 8th of July 2015 and the 1st of July 2022, 673 collision victims were submitted by volunteers. These were, of course, all loose observations. They were not gathered in a standardized way, but at least they gave us some idea of which species were most prone to bird collisions. And you see it's mainly gulls and pigeons which were recorded. And then when we made that overlay of all those observations with the Elia grid, we saw that some of them did not match that Elia grid. And this is because some of them were not the result of a collision with a high voltage power line, but of an electrocution. And we saw that these electrocutions mainly took place at medium and low voltage, mainly medium voltage power lines. We got quite some data, and even though they were gathered by volunteers, not in a methodological standardized way, but just loose observations, we were quite shocked by the results, being 26 white storks, 1 right kite, 4 peregrine falcons, 11 eagle owls. These were quite staggering numbers to us. So we do have deadly poles, and so far this problem has not been tackled very accurately. Now, Elia wanted us to have some dedicated searches under some of the black lines, because they were planning to put up bird diverters under some of those lines, and they wanted to know how many victims before, how many victims after the bird diverters were put up. So the monitoring of black lines was done on a regular interval. mainly during the winter half year when the vegetation is at its lowest, and before and after the bird deterrent devices were put up. There were some methodological limitations due to financial restrictions. So most of the dedicated searches were carried out by volunteers, but nonetheless, the results were quite interesting. All our dedicated searches have led to 888 collision victims. And here you see once again the top 10 of the species which were most oftenly recorded. And it's clearly again the same group of species, the pigeons and the gulls, which were very well present. But we also got a lot of red list species as well. So what we did in a first test case, in the Noordschoten case, which is situated in the Iser Valley, we advised Elia to use fireflies because we saw that during our dedicated searches before the bird deterrent devices were put up, that we did have a lot of species which are nocturnally active, either because they are feeding at night, but most of them are migrating at night. So you see common bittern, woodcock, even stone curlew, water rail. And because a lot of studies show that the fireflies are very, very efficient, we advise them to put up the fireflies. And these devices, like Erik said already, refract the sunlight and provide a sparkle effect, which is visible to birds up to a distance of 400 meters. And the fireflies are made of luminescent materials that it emits visible light for up to 60 hours after dusk. So this showed up, this resulted to be very, very efficient. Now, I'm not going into specific details, but this table clearly shows that before putting up the bird deterrent devices, the fireflies, we had 113 casualties. After, we had only 6 casualties. And correcting for the abundance of each species during the investigation period considered, we saw that there was a reduction of casualties between 73 and 95%, which is absolutely huge. So these results were surpassing our expectations, and both Elia and Natuurpunt were extremely pleased with this tryout. One very important thing of the cooperation between Elia and Natuurpunt is, first, of course, that the number of that we know where the black lines are, where the highest risks of bird collisions are situated, that we know how to tackle them, and that putting up bird devices is extremely, or can be extremely efficient. But we also got very, very positive press coverage. An industrial partner working together with a green NGO. This is something quite new. And we got many media coverage. Just to give you an idea, we appeared 6 times on the national television news, so the 7 o'clock news, prime time. We got 5 press releases by Belga, which is our national press agency. We appeared 10 times on regional television, 42 times in newspapers, 65 times on news websites. So even though this was not our main aim, it was very well appreciated both by the NGOs and by Elia. So we got from our background, our members, we got a lot of positive comments on a green NGO working together with an industrial partner. And I think that Elia had the same kind of reactions within their company. And this made Elia to have a specific point of attention in their Act Now program, which is Elia's action plan in line with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, in which they promised as a company to equip bird deterrent device, or to put up bird deterrent devices on 200 kilometers of the most dangerous black lines by 2030. So this is now a policy statement of Elia itself. The TSO commits itself to achieve this goal by 2030. And of course, 200 kilometers out of the 5,614, it's only a small percentage, but by doing so, by equipping those 200 kilometers of black lines, the most important, the most dangerous lines will be hopefully solved. So we are very happy with this commitment. Last slide, some takeaway messages. A good collaboration between TSOs and NGOs is essential to avoid a lot of bird casualties. The TSOs have access to the high voltage power line grid, and the NGOs know where the risky lines are. They possess the data which are needed to come up with a risk atlas. Of course, when you want to create a risk atlas, you need a recent data set on the occurrence of birds. This is essential. If you have no recent data, it will be impossible to come up with an atlas. And that's also why Elia has decided to ask Natuurpunt and Natagora to have an update every 10 years, because bird communities are dynamic. The situations are evolving, and we need to be on top of it. So every 10 years, at least that's the intention, we will come up with a new risk atlas. Volunteers are of key importance to collect such data. It turns out that collecting all those data by professionals, that's gonna be way too costly. So we have to rely on very good volunteers, and they are extremely willing to do so, especially if they see and realize that these data are actually used for a better bird protection. So in order to gather these data, a user-friendly data platform is a very cost-efficient means to collect data, specifically on power line victims. So we did add one single field in the field of behavior, and the data came flowing in without us having to do a lot. Of course, for the TSOs and DSOs alike, a good risk atlas is an extremely useful tool to help TSOs both to plan, to build or not to build new power lines, and to decide which existing power lines have to be equipped first with bird deterrent devices. So the risk atlas helps extremely well to prioritize. The number of black lines is often only a small percentage of the total grid. If we would have said to Elia, you have to put up bird diverters on the whole grid of 5,614 kilometers, Elia would have said, no way, totally impossible. But now it turns out that it's only about 5% or so. And now Elia says, okay, that's a task we can, that's achievable, let's go for it. We have to reach out to DSOs as well, Elia being a TSO, but we have a few DSOs as well. And if we want to tackle the problem of electrocutions, we do have to contact the DSOs as well, but so far we have not been very successful in doing so. And last one, if partners like Elia and Natuurpunt have a mutual trust in one another, they really can make a difference. But we have seen that trust is something which has to grow through the years. And yeah, so far we have been very lucky with our partners, and we have been extremely happy with the results we've achieved so far. So that's it for me, and I give the word to Liam once again.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for that really fantastic example. As I said, this is one of what we regard to be the best cooperations that we've seen. I think it underlines each time the power of collaboration, the importance of data, the role of civil society. Yeah, well done. There's a lot to learn, and that was an excellent presentation, so thanks. I've got an eye on the clock, and as an adopted German, I'm getting a bit nervous about time, so I will start without further ado. To give you a real look into one of our projects at RGI, which also looks at this issue of collaboration, also seeks to move forward better bird protection through the involvement of civil society. And then we'll have time for questions in about 10 minutes time. So let me begin. I'll speak to you about a project which is very close to my heart, not only because I'm the project manager here at RGI, but because I find it a fantastic collaboration. It's the Bird Portal project, or the Vogelfundportal in German. This has as its main kind of main vehicle an interactive map online where we invite members of the public who find a dead or an injured bird underneath a power line to register via NABU's website so that it can be then processed by an ornithologist at NABU, shared with the relevant grid operators for awareness of where the problem lines really are, and then represented on this map to get a better idea of the data and where the birds are. It's also something that both Eric and Dominique underlined as being very important. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let me just hit you with some key figures. The project was launched in 2017. We're currently in the 5th year of the project. Last year, we had a nice little celebration for our 4th year. And next year, we're very happy that all the partners on board will move into the 3rd phase of the project for another 3 years, at least. It's an IRD project. What does that mean? At RGI, we have these RGI declarations. There's 3, one of which is on electricity network development and nature conservation. And with projects like this, where we bring together NGOs and TSOs or DSOs and grid operators generally into collaboration, we seek to then implement the values which we hold at the core of these declarations, which are, like I said, at the core of RGI's work. The project at the moment is made up of NABU, 4 TSOs, 4 DSOs. Apologies for the death by acronym in case these aren't clear. TSOs is transmission system operators and DSOs is distribution system operators. So currently there's NABU plus 7 partners, but we're always looking to expand. So if there's any German DSOs in the audience, then call me. And here you see them all. So there are all 4 TSOs from across Germany and then 3 DSOs from a wide geographical range. As I said, the base of this project is really collaboration and citizen science. We have the online report and phone hotline where everyone can report a dead bird that they find. It's very easy to do. I've done it myself when I found a goose last year. There is all information to give in here. We also encourage people to upload photos so that the ornithologist at NABU can really see what's happened to the bird. And that's really the only way of looking at it and seeing how it died. Citizen science is key, of course. This is us reaching out to members of the public and asking them to be involved and to contribute. And so far, over the 4.5 years of the project, we've had 273 reports, which equates to 400 birds and approximately 50 plus records per year. So these aren't huge numbers, but they are significant. And what they seek to do, I mean, as a joint systematic data collection exercise, is twofold. It seeks to improve the knowledge base in Germany in general, and also then bring to the grid operators awareness, the need to act, and the right approach for bird protection. This doesn't mean that every find equals a immediate action, because that's just not realistic or possible sometimes. Sometimes the grid needs to be turned off, and these passes are very hard to come by. But what it does do, and why it's so valuable, is that it paints an accurate picture and a current picture of sensitive areas in Germany. Which data is used? A quick overview. We have some overlays. Of course, this is the grid map. This has all high voltage, medium voltage, and low voltage lines on. We have the breeding areas for different birds of various Gefährdungsklassen, endangeredness, which is not a word, but I think you know what I mean. And finally, we also have another layer of data, which is the special protection areas in the UK, in Germany. So this is the data that we use. And as you see, then the points on the map represent a find. As I said, this helps us to paint a more accurate, up-to-date picture of where we're at with regard to the issue of collision and electrocution in Germany. And here's some findings which are not necessarily surprising. This reflects a lot of what Eric and Dominique said. The most, here we see on the left-hand side, sorry, it's in German. This is the breakdown of the finds of victims of collision. And you see here the yellow is cranes, where the blue is swans, followed by geese, storks, falcons and birds of prey, and then herons, pigeons, etc. On the next graph here, we see The same, but for electrocution. And here as well, we see storks as the main victims of electrocution, followed by birds of prey and falcons. Then we have owls, cray types, and these are unknown. And then we have singing birds or smaller birds, yeah. What I think is important to underline that this project, it goes beyond just data. It goes beyond simply mapping the data that we receive. It's the ideal format for knowledge and best practice exchange between grid operators and the NABU as the real expert on generally bird protection. It enables us to exchange experiences with things like bird markers, for example, which is why we've set up AG Vogelmarkierung, which is a working group on bird markers. This is a talking group to share experiences and across grid operators, look at how we can learn from each other and what we need also to identify maybe shortfallings and work on this. Other than that, though, of course, with RGI being RGI, we always seek to kind of spread news, spread good practices, and we do that through brochures, video materials, and I'm giving you a sneak peek now of something which has not been seen yet so far. We have releasing in the next weeks and months a brochure. Here you see the German version, but it will be translated into English, Spanish, French, Polish, Bulgarian, the list goes on. We will have this wonderful brochure, which was made by my excellent colleague, Eston, to really present the problem of collision and electrocution, but also zoom in on potential solutions. What we want to do is really raise awareness of the problem because it's known to grid operators, of course, they're all trying to tackle this problem. And we want to kind of take away some of the scary, the unknown, and really show people how this issue can and is being dealt with. So I'm very excited to launch that, and I hope you'll join me in a few weeks' time in sharing it as far as you can. There will be printed versions as well, so you can get your hands on that and put it on your wall, put it on your fridge, whatever you'll do. And not just that as well, we also have events, we have regular meetings, of course, but something which I'm very excited about is that this year, at the end of September, we will have a conference in Dortmund where we will bring all German stakeholders together to discuss then the pathway from where we are now to a grid which is truly safe for all birds. Of course, this is already so important, but as we accelerate the energy transition, it's only going to become more important. So you are all welcome to join this webinar. It will be this conference. It will be in German. So speaking German would be good, but it's going to have also some inputs in English, for example, from the now quite famous Dominique Verbelen. So let us know if you want to join, and I'll ask my colleague Eston to share the link into the chat so that you can sign up already. We'll be advertising for this soon. If you're interested, just get in touch as well. I flew through that, but I wanted to move on to the discussion. As I said, though, before I finish, if you have questions, please do get in touch. I always love to hear from new best practices that we're not aware of. We have a social media campaign going at the moment, and we are always looking to kind of highlight the good work from across Europe, but also beyond. So don't be hesitant and get in touch with me. You have my email address there and your family on the website as well. And yeah, I think without further ado, we should move to the discussion. And I see that there's already quite a lot of conversation going on in the chat. What I would ask is that as we move into the discussion, if you can turn your cameras on, we'd love to see as many faces as we can. I think it makes the discussion very pleasant. And I would start at the top with some of the questions that we saw coming in. So, a question that came in right at the start, which it was from Marius Strecker from Tenet. Hello, Marius. You asked about the role of the environmental managers. Would you like to unmute and ask this question, or shall I? I see you there. Hi, Marius. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah, well, it was a question to Eric. He spoke about the necessity of environmental managers who should then identify those risky parts. Yeah? What is the idea behind this? Is a manager installed by the authorities, because, or should it be by the DSOs, TSOs? How could it work?
Yeah, the the word of an environment manager is very unprecise in some cases. So in some countries, those managers are actually linked to the authority, where they actually have a staff, a person that is looking at this interaction between necessary bird protection done by the operator, of course, but who is seated in the administration. But also there are companies that have environmental managers that are in the company itself, a focus and a key position to always keep up this issue when looking at new power line developments, but also necessary modifications. So it's not really classified. It's something that we got different approaches from the different nationalities, and this word is found to subsidize it, to summarize this. Yes.
Thank you very much to both of you for that question. Another question that came in was from Ireland, from Robert Fennelly. It was about, again, about the study and about the collaboration between RPS and NABU and the TSOs. Robert, if you're with us, I would ask you to unmute and ask the question yourself. Please go ahead. Okay, perhaps that's not possible. I'll go ahead and read it out. The question came, this one's for you, Eric, as well. Mm-hmm. Did RPS consult with the TSO or indeed the transmission asset owners in Ireland? Or how were the collaboration in general, maybe more broadly, between when the study was done, the authors and grid operators?
No, so the survey done by RPS in the national NGO scene was without corresponding or contacting directly TSOs or administrations in these countries. The feedback we got and that was evaluated was very comprehensive, but only by the NGOs. Ireland was asked to distribute, but there was none or not sufficient answers. There were a few countries where we didn't get, or where RPS didn't get, the relevant information that could be one-to-one be in comparison to other feedbacks from other partners. The UK was not contacted for feedback because it was not an EU country at that moment already.
Okay, thank you. All clear. A few of the questions that have come in have been more specific. They've been on the durability of certain bird diverters, specifically fireflies. There was a question from Greece and a question also from Germany, from Martin Dörr. I would maybe, because my colleague Roland in his question also asked about the lifespan of bird diverters and deterrent devices, I'd pass the word to you, Roland, so that you can ask the one or two questions that you posted in the chat there.
Thanks a lot, Liam. I think I got some kind of answer from Dominique written in the chat, and thanks a lot again for both three presentations, very helpful. I can repeat my question really quickly. So I was interested in the usage of drones as a new tool to install bird diverters, and how much will this help in putting forward this very important work. And then, of course, the lifespan or the durability of bird diverters overall. Thank you.
Should I go first and Dominique then, or?
Yeah, please go ahead, Eric.
Okay. So the firefly as a type of diverter is used in Germany mainly on the medium voltage or high voltage level. It's not on the highest transmission power lines. There have been different experiences. So at some point they are very effective, especially crossing water bodies, for example. But in studies that have been made in other European countries, the efficiency is less. So I was very interested in Dominique's study that he presented, that there was really high effect of those diverters on bird collisions. So the situation seems to differ probably on the topography and the species sets that are faced or are in focus for those measures. The opportunity or the possibility for a drone installation is quite new. I know, or we know from the bird marker working group that Liam was talking about, that it's not like the 100% best solution. So there are also difficulties for especially the installation with helicopters or with drones. They have advantages and disadvantages regarding which time is the best to actually install the diverters. During breeding season, resting seasons, always like a bad timing, it seems, and depends on the protection of the site. But I think for the question that you asked, Roland, it's probably a good opportunity to speed up the bird protection successes. If we have good and useful, and for the grid operators cheap possibilities to put them on the power lines. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's there isn't a single miracle solution which will avoid a fully 100% of collisions. That there is no such thing as a no risk line. If you want a no risk line, you have to put it on the ground. That's quite clear. Having said that, I think that usually for a TSO, it takes an awful amount of time to plan and to get all the permissions and to get all the highly specialized technicians and to put the line out of order in order to be able to put up the bird deterrent devices. So if you can speed up the process of equipping the black lines with bird diverters by using drones, I think this will help a lot. There are, of course, some limitations. I've been told that the usage of fireflies is limited to lines up to 110 kilovolts, no higher. So that is already a limitation. But what I find really interesting is to learn about what works and what doesn't work. And of course, it will depend on the species. It will depend on the site. But we have, for instance, in Belgium, we did put up some small bird curls on only conducting cables. And the Baki, we had less victims before than afterwards. So I would really like to ask every single NGO to spread all the knowledge they have. Also, the negative knowledge. If something does not work out, please do tell the others what you found. And maybe it will work out in another country, on another situation. But sometimes I do have the feeling that everyone is inventing the wheel for himself, and we are not spreading enough of our knowledge, even though we do have the websites and the internet. Getting together and sharing information, both positive and negative, should be done way more, as far as I'm concerned. As far as durability for Belgium, it has only been used on one line in Noordschoten in 2019. None of the fireflies, as far as I know, came down so far, but durability-wise, I think this should be kind of okay. The main problem I heard from one of the engineers of Elia with regard to fireflies is that when it gets windy, and I don't know the proper English word, but it might cause a lot of pressure on the lines if it gets windy and there are too much fireflies, and the engineers have to calculate whether how many fireflies there can be attached on both sides of each pole. So the frustrating part for NGOs sometimes is that they come up with what they think is ecologically wise the best solution, but then the engineers of the TSO said, well, that might be the best solution, but we are not going to do it because technical wise it's not possible, it's not feasible, we don't want it because of electricity. We can't guarantee the supply of electricity. There might be a fire, a risk fire or whatever. So those engineers should really be working together with the NGOs to come up with the best solution for each specific line, each specific species, each specific site. But in general, I think especially the meta study of Bernardino, or was it Barrientos? I always mix them up. Is really showing what is usually working better than other devices.
Can I add something?
Please go ahead, Olivia from Elia.
Hello, yes, I work for Elia. Thank you, Dominique, for all the very good explanations so far. Maybe I can add that for the fireflies, we noted one problem, that is that after some time, they get stuck and they don't move anymore like they should. So that's something we noticed recently in Noordscoot. So we don't know yet what to do with that, but that's something to mention. And like Dominique said, we would love to hear from other experiences with a drone installation or with the fireflies, because we are in September going to use drones for the first time to place fireflies. And indeed, it appears a very interesting solution to speed up the installation of bird markers. Also regarding price and security, it has a lot of advantages. But the problem is that so far we don't have material that can be used on 150 kilovolt lines. So we are currently looking with our suppliers if they can provide us a solution, but I would love to hear if in other countries, other suppliers already have such solutions. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Thanks very much, Olivia. On the drone mounting of fireflies, I know that this has been done by some grid operators in Germany. Erik, maybe you can remember which ones it was, but I know that there is experience of this in Germany, so I'll be happy to connect you. Do you remember, Erik?
Yeah, I think most experience does NetzBW have on this.
Okay.
So it's a distribution grid operator in Germany.
I'd be happy to connect you, Olivia. And I can only echo what was said by Dominique about really sharing experiences on good experiences, but also things which didn't work. These forums for exchange are super important so that we can learn from each other. I'll share a link in the chat now to the Energy Task Force of the Convention for Migratory Species. This is a task force built up mainly of NGOs and government bodies working on the issue. We have a Powerline working group, and this is the perfect forum to share knowledge like this. Having said that, RGI is also a great format for sharing things like this. So again, please do share anything you want with me, and I can look at setting up a mailing list if that makes sense. We're very happy to do that. We've had a lot of questions coming about data, and I'd like to talk about that. But first of all, I'd go to Estella for your question, quite a specific question for Erik about distances between components. Estella, if you're still there, please go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you very much, and great job, really. The review was extremely interesting, and one of the topics that we have been looking at is trying to find what would be good guidance on establishing a safe minimum distance between components. And I understand, I mean, obviously this depends on the species and on the regions and so on. But I was wondering whether during your review you've encountered some good practices about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's always a question that has been raised a lot also in the last years, and it's not so easy to answer because it depends on what side and from what focus you look at it. From the ornithological side and from us as NGO, as NABU, we not a big surprise, we would say please use smaller distances. So we recommend in our publications when we started to really focus on this issue, 15 to 25 meters for this one type of the Reber markers. But we also learned in the last years that it's not that easy, and it's not possible in many cases because the statics of the pylons don't really allow such close distances. So the grid operators, they have different measures. So it's like more 25 meters and more. And it also depends on, do you want to install them on existing power lines, or are you talking about new power lines where you can plan the statics in the first place already with the weight that those devices or diverters would have. So it's not really that easy to have like this all-round recommendation for the perfect distance. Also, the other aspect is if you have ground wires which are twice on a power line on a horizontal on one horizontal level, it might work that you have those alternating. So the distance on one of the ground wires is longer, but the visual effect is like half of it because you have alternative installations. So maybe that's an interesting addition.
Thanks a lot. I think my question was more related to the components on the crossarm. And so the distance between the pin insulators, I mean, your answer is still very good, but it's yeah, I was thinking of a different aspect. Sorry, I haven't been that clear.
Well, in Germany, the minimum distance between components on medium voltage power poles is 130. I think this is what is said in the technical guidelines that exist. So yeah, you have different measurements between different phases on one level, but also the length of the insulation, the distance to the upper cross arm. So there are different measurements. I can provide you, if you give me your contact information with this technical guideline where you can find this in detail if you want.
Thank you very much.
Liam, maybe it would be useful to ask TSOs internationally to come up with a guideline of what is technically possible, because now it's sometimes frustrating. You come up with an ecological solution and then it's turned down on technical reasons. So I'm really, really interested to know from TSOs and DSOs what is maximally possible technical wise. And what are the problems if the distance between two diverters is only 5 meters? Will they fall down? Will they cause a fire? Will it be risky when it's too windy? It would be really useful for us to know from the TSOs and DSOs, because they are the engineers, they have the technical knowledge which we don't have, to know what it is. Because now, as far as I'm concerned, this information is not readily available to NGOs.
Yeah, thanks, Dominique. That's a really, really good point. I think that's something that we should look into more. I've made a note, and I'm looking at Eric now as well. Maybe this is something we can look at together.
Well, I think this this working group on diverters is actually really looking into this. So we collected so much information, at least from the German TSOs and DSOs within the project. And we came up with a long list of criteria, which on the technical side allows bird diverters, but also the restrictions, why they don't function, why they fall down, whatever. So yeah, we're working on this, and possibly we have a result that we can contribute in the whole discussion outside of our project.
Stay tuned. A couple of questions on data came in, as I said. One from Nikos Iopelas from BirdLife Greece. This was a short one. I could read it out, or go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like, Nikos. Yeah.
Okay, Liam, thank you. That's a good chance, I mean, to talk to you in person. What I wanted to say is that human resources, professionals and volunteers are quite, few. But the companies, both the TSOs and the DSOs, have quite extended knowledge of what happens and what doesn't happen in their network. At least in Greece, they are aware of quite a lot of incidents of electrocution and collision, because many times you know that this thing is causing blackouts or damages. Have you ever tried to persuade the companies to provide such information? It would be really useful.
Can I get you to just summarize that question in one brief sentence, please?
Yes, whether the TSOs and DSOs could input data in your portal.
Okay, if it would come directly from them. So far, I mean, it's been basically citizens, and we've had some colleagues from the TSOs and DSOs providing it themselves. I think it's a really good initiative to look at them doing this more. I know data is always sensitive. Maybe Eric, you can also say more on this as well.
Well, it's not really a systematic monitoring that we have with our project. It's more these, individuals, spontaneous incidents that are recognized by single persons. Those can be just individuals from the public, but it can also be a staff member from a company. This is actually something we would like to improve. We would like to have more data, and we also want to have more professionals integrated into the reporting system. So by now, it's not a systematic monitoring and not a special involvement of the company staff.
Yeah, Liam, we've had that same problem, or we tackled that same problem in Belgium already, because whenever there is a breakdown, whenever there is an electricity failure due to a collision, one of the technicians of the TSO has to go on the site, he has to repair, and they are our boots on the ground. They have way more people in the field than the NGOs have. So we kindly asked Elia whether it would be possible for us as an NGO to educate the technicians of Elia when they go to repair a specific incident, to look around if there is a white stork or a crane or whatever, because that would give us an awful amount of extra data. And of course, as you said, Liam, I somehow feel that you're a bit cautious about doing so, because they are sharing the weaknesses of their system. If they have to say, well, we had last week we had 350 shortages, electricity went down there, and there. That's not a positive thing to share. But I think the trust has to be there between the TSOs and the NGOs, and this has to be considered to be confidential information, but very essential information to be shared in a commonly used database. So I really would like to ask once more the question and to reach out to TSOs to share all the information they have when their technicians go out in the field.
Thank you very much, Dominique. That's a really good point, and another call for open data as much as we can get it. I think that's a really, really important fight ongoing, to get people to be more open with data, to share and to be transparent. I would love to keep this discussion going for longer, but I'm looking at the time and it's 1 o'clock. It's flown by and there's been so much engagement. I'll keep the chat saved and I'll try and address these questions that we didn't get around to answering. But as well, please do get in touch. I can exchange and connect the people in the room here. And of course, this is a webinar series that we will continue over the coming months. Thank you to everyone that's joining. It was a fantastic exchange, and we look forward to speaking in the future. The recording will be up soon, and like I said, please spread the news. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you from our side too. Thanks.
Thank you. See you.